trust and confidence, and we have a bank of that for situations when a crisis happens and we have to respond quickly and publicly to what's happened. Speaking of crisis, we wish we didn't have to have panels on these kind of discussions, but we do, and preparedness is key for those kind of things. Our next session is about what happens when an industry is thrown into a crisis situation, and all the reasons planning and being prepared is important, better than waiting for a crisis to be at your front door. Today, you're going to hear about the lessons we've learned from the avian influenza pandemic. I'm going to introduce our panel of speakers, and they'll each present, and then we do have a Q&A session. So as you're listening to them, please write down those questions and be ready to help with the Q&A. Substitute today, but no substitute for us. We've got Dr. David Wolfgang. He is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. He earned his Master's of Public Health degree from Penn State College of Medicine in Hershey. He was in private veterinary practice with an emphasis on large animals from June of '82 to October of '95. From '95 through July of 2016, he was a director of field investigations and an extension veterinarian for the Department of Veterinary and Biomedical Sciences at Penn State. In August of 2016, he accepted the position as the Pennsylvania State Veterinarian, and he retired in March of 2019. He's been very active in local and state veterinary organizations, and he served for 8 years on the Pennsylvania State Board of Veterinary Medicine. He's currently serving in a temporary capacity as an assistant state veterinarian with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. His primary areas of professional emphasis include cost-effective preventative health and diagnostic programs for livestock species, on-farm food safety and quality, emerging and zoonotic diseases, animal well-being, and continuing education programs for veterinarians. He's a huge advocate for the dairy industry. He's super involved with emergency planning. And as we said, stepping in today, because unfortunately, Dr. Kevin Brightbill, your current state veterinarian, is at a farm as we speak, depopulating due to another breakout. So again, this is truly education as we're speaking. Jennifer Reed Harry is with us today. Jennifer joined Penn Ag Industries Association in 2009, and she works on issues related to environmental regulations, legislation, transportation, workforce labor, as well as being a registered lobbyist. This woman never sleeps. In addition, Jennifer serves as the executive director of the Pennsylvania Soybean Board, as well as serving on the Eastern Region Soybean Board. She serves on numerous state committees and with direct oversight on issues such as compliance with the Chesapeake Bay mandates, EPA, CAFO issues, and land application of manure. She also oversees the work of the Center for Poultry and Livestock Excellence here in Pennsylvania. Your third panelist for today that will be helping us is Byron Shaffer. Byron has been with the Kreider Farms for the past 22 years, serving as the Director of Food Quality and Assurance for the past 12. In that role, he is responsible for food safety, quality assurance, regulatory compliance, animal wealth, and biosecurity, and he was part of the leadership team at Kreider Farms that managed the index case for HPAI in the state. Byron has 40-plus years of experience in food service and food production, and he's back home. He's a graduate of Penn State University. Please make welcome your three panelists for today. And we're going to let Dr. Wolfgang up to the microphone first.
So they called me out of the bullpen to fill in today. So I got a call last night from Dr. Brightbill, and he is visiting a farm sort of as we speak to address that. And we have had another break, not even the one he's visiting. We had another break yesterday with another flock that'll be taken down in Lancaster County. So as we speak, that crisis is sort of emerging. Well, we're going to talk a little about HPAI and the importance of that for the poultry industry in Pennsylvania and the United States. I hope you get some lessons that you'll take home to prepare yourselves and your farms for biosecurity incidents that may be happening maybe as we speak in the dairy, the beef, or the swine industry, not only here but around the world. So very quickly, you see a map up before you. The real problem we have is birds like to fly. They fly south in the wintertime and they fly back up north in the spring. And right now, as we speak, birds are leaving Central and South America, flying back with whatever viruses and bacteria they've shared in Central and South America. They're going to fly over Pennsylvania on the Atlantic Flyway, and some of them will deposit virus along the way. And that's really our scary part is it's a national, and I'll show you, an international disease, and very difficult, very challenging to control that for that reason. No surprise to you that live in central Pennsylvania, there are a lot of chickens in central PA, and a lot of ducks, and a lot of geese, and a lot of fowl in general, very concentrated. And actually the house that went down yesterday, within 100 yards of the house that went down earlier, about a week ago. And though they tried their best to keep the virus from spreading, think about it. Mice, rats, trucks, cars, just a lot of incidental, far enough that, again, feathers, air could blow the virus on dust particles from barn to barn. It's extremely challenging in a concentrated situation to keep the virus from spreading. Poultry is catching up to you, believe it or not. Poultry in Pennsylvania is growing like mad. All you have to do is drive through Lancaster. There's a new broiler barn every other day going up down there. And so poultry is extremely valuable, billions of dollars worth of ag industry within PA. That does a lot of good things. It keeps feed companies in central PA, not just for the poultry guys. It helps you. Brings feed, brings ag resources, brings skills. Poultry management is also manure management. Poultry management also Chesapeake Bay management. It's valuable for the whole ag industry to have poultry be successful and safe. At the same time, we have to coexist with the dairy people and the beef people and the swine people. And so it's challenging when you have all that. But there is some value to having ag infrastructure in an area. So Pennsylvania should be really proud of that and encourage that and do our best to work together. So one of the things that we do at the Department of Agriculture is to try to manage regulatory diseases. And right now, high-path avian influenza is the largest sort of fish we have to fry. But there's lots of other issues that have to do that. And so there's challenges with how do you compensate farmers. If we force you to depopulate your flock, there is some indemnity. People don't get rich. I'm sure, well, maybe Byron will be on a bit later. You don't get rich with the indemnity process. We're just trying to Band-Aid to get you through to the next few weeks, next few months, next few years. So don't think that somehow the indemnity process is painless. It just helps you survive, and that's all we're talking about. Can we help the farm survive? Right now, our strategy for controlling most of these highly infectious disease, put a circle on the map, all the infected flock, and all those birds die. That's the strategy. All those birds die. Virus multiplies extremely rapidly. Birds, perfectly fine a day or two, a couple of days later, they're dead. Sometimes you don't even have much signs. We would expect, oh, there's going to gradually creep. Influenza is so rapid in those flocks that suddenly a couple of birds are sick one day, a day or two later, lots of birds are dead. And there actually is an animal welfare, poultry welfare issue associated with this. These birds suffer and die. I mean, they have what we call vasculitis. Their blood vessels get damaged all over them. Their combs on their head get blue. Their feet get blue. They can't get any oxygen or blood to their bodies, and they basically suffocate. They just can't breathe, and they fall over dead suddenly. So you don't think somehow the poultry guys missed it. If when it's introduced into their flocks, it's so severe that they really don't have time to prepare. So the only thing they can do really is prepare ahead of time to try to prevent the disease coming in. Important to emphasize to you at this point, the eggs are safe, the meat's safe. Every once in a while you hear a little bit, there is some cases, mostly in other countries, where people are actually processing birds that are sick. And if you inhale a lot of the virus tends to cause infection deep in your lungs. There is a low percentage of people that get very ill with this virus. For that reason, all the people that work with the depopulation, all the people that work with the stacking up the birds for decontamination, they're going to wear masks. And so it's challenging. Now we suddenly have people with PPE on, personal protective equipment, face masks, hair nets, booties, and they're working sometimes in January and July, try to depopulate these birds. So it's very challenging to depopulate this. Not easy. It is a worldwide problem. It's in Asia. It flies into Europe, so there's cases in Europe. Some of those birds fly back into northern Siberia. They mix with birds that fly up to Alaska in the summertime. They mix up there. Then some of those birds fly back into North America. Some of those birds fly back into Asia and Europe. And so the viruses get mixed. You all have seen or heard about the COVID thing and how virus changes slightly every time. Well, the influenza virus is probably even worse. So you have all these variations, all these multiplications, all these viruses change, and those strains can get carried across the planet. One of the challenges we have right now is the current H5 strain is extremely virulent. And so when we say high path, it means it's highly pathogenic for birds. Chickens, turkeys die. The problem is it's probably a natural virus for many waterfowl, and so many ducks, many geese survive. And so now we have carriers. So you have apparently healthy animals that fly hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, carrying the virus basically across the continents. And so it's an extremely challenging international disease control effort. This is last year. This is where it was in the United States. If you look at the 3 flyways and overlap that, where is it? It's everywhere in the United States. We always think, hey, why don't those guys in Lancaster just squeeze down a little harder on biosecurity and do a better job? It's extremely hard because the virus is in many, many, many waterfowl that fly back and forth. I know many of you that have farms probably have a pond. What shows up on that pond pretty soon? Some of those resident geese. So we not only have the migratory birds flying, there's a certain level of sort of native population of feral geese and ducks that stay. All those friends that think they're doing you a favor by feeding the ducks at the farm pond, the city pond with the stale bread, they're not doing anybody any favor. So if you can discourage that, please discourage that as much as you can. We don't need feral ducks and feral geese out there right now. But it's a national problem, not just Pennsylvania. There is a policy in PA if we do suspect a high path outbreak, and this same format would follow for any foreign animal disease. We need to notify the regulatory officials as soon as you can, and then there's basically a triage set up, a commander, an incident command system where there's a bunch of operations people, logistics people, communications people, all those people are notified, and then action is taken. Again, we're actively depopulate birds. The flock the other day was depopulated at 3 in the morning. As soon as we find it, again, so the virus doesn't spread, we try to send a depopulation team in there just as quickly as possible. And then we've been working with Penn Ag Industries to help get the message out to the consumer public and the producer public. Right now in Pennsylvania, our 3 diagnostic labs are set up as part of what we call the National Animal Health Network. And so those lab networks are certified to do tests. Again, we're fortunate in PA that those labs could also detect and be approved to detect things like foot and mouth disease, avian, African swine fever in our swine. And so you don't have to wait till the samples go to Iowa, get a result and come back. They can actually be driven to the labs and sampled overnight. And with PCR technology, in general, those results are coming back in less than 24 hours. And it's very important that we do that. That structure, that support for rapid diagnostics means that the diseases can be diagnosed in Pennsylvania quickly, and then action can be taken as soon as possible. Again, one animal maybe secretes a few million, a few billion virus particles. 10,000 animals, maybe 100,000 animals or birds in one spot. You're just talking just an overwhelming number of infectious particles very quickly. So the goal is right now is to put a circle around that infected flock as soon as possible and try to control it as quickly as we can. Current status right now, we've had several flocks in Pennsylvania. We had the summer crisis is pretty well cleaned up, 38 flocks total. Unfortunately, we had a break about a month ago with some turkey flocks, and then most recently we've had 2 duck flocks that were affected, and then just recently last night a couple small chicken flocks, but we are in the middle of investigating another flock right now, and so the number is about 5 at the moment, but until I get home and check my email, we may not know how many there are. But so far they've been relatively small, relatively confined, and so the goal is to maintain that. It gets complicated to do this. This is the epidemiological curve for last year. As you can expect, last spring, summer, lots of flocks. This is across the U.S., lots of flocks. Most of these were in the Midwest. The little curve on the right, the little blip on the right, that tended to be a little more spread out. That involved the Pennsylvania flocks. And so you can see, because of migration, more cases tend to be in the fall and in the spring. And right now, unfortunately, we're already seeing some breaks, a break in Tennessee, a break in Virginia, several breaks in PA. As those birds are flying north from the Central America, we're seeing more breaks in our flyway as well. So what can that lesson tell you? Well, I'm going to encourage you that the only thing that you can really do to prevent diseases like this is have a better biosecurity plan. And that truly is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is a type 1, type 2 economic error. We do have some people back here with their MBAs in sort of veterinary medicine and production health. But again, if you think it doesn't pay and you spend money for it, that's a type 1 error. So you think that biosecurity is going to cost you a little bit of money, and it never helps your farm. You spent the money, didn't get much. If you decide, I don't think that stuff's worth anything at all, I'm not going to do it, but you have a big break, the cost associated with that is usually much, much greater. And that's truly the case with biosecurity. It costs very little, very small investment in your time and effort and equipment to have a biosecurity plan rather than that. And so biosecurity really talks about keeping things off your farm, contain them if they get on your farm, and then be careful with what leaves your farm. Just very simply, that's what it is. I'm going to encourage you to think about how you do that, how things get transferred on your farm, sort of the modes of transfer, how things get spread from place to place to place. And I want to think about what might carry it. So flies, mice, rats, feral birds, feral animals, mud on the, I used this for decades, mud, manure, urine, and dirt on your farm. Animal secretions always have the highest amount of bacteria, viruses, or bacteria in them. And so mud on the farm. And think about how much mud there might be on your farm, on your shoes, on your tires, on the manure spreader, on the walls. I mean, it's everywhere. And that's easy to do. People visit your farm, drive off on your farm, equipment off and on your farm, feed people on and off your farm, seed salesmen on and off your farm, upsman on and off your farm. All those areas, potential ways that things can be on your farm or leave your farm. So, as bad as it's been in the poultry industry, think about how hard it might be to contain a virus or bacteria, a big disease like this, on a dairy farm. Most of our birds in a pretty nice little box, and we can control them. Think about your dairy cattle. You almost have to have curtain side. We have a lot more ventilation. That's an issue. We're talking about naturally ventilated barns versus mechanically ventilated barns. We're talking about lots more feed coming off the farm. Big feed, not like grain. We're talking about hay, silage, stuff that comes in big wagons, okay? Not in a truck with a top on it. Very challenging. And think about if you had to depopulate 100 dairy cows or 1,000 dairy cows. How would you dispose of 100 dairy cows or 1,000 dairy cows? How would you decontaminate your whole barn and disinfect it? We're talking serious challenges. So think about that a little bit. Yeah, it's system thinking a little bit. You have to think bigger picture, how you do that, how you develop your biosecurity plan. But think about all the people that might be involved, all the equipment that might be involved, all those feed supplies, all those, quote, quote, lines of separation. This is clean, this is dirty. How would you do that? How do you access that? We have some examples in PA. We did have a dairy farm that spent some time with a secure dairy program, which is a similar program to some of the programs they have in poultry. And that individual had spent some time thinking about how product moves on their farm, how I get the milk truck on and off the farm. I have a broiler house over here. I have a dairy parlor and milking facility over here. How do I manage those two things? Because that farmer in central Pennsylvania had spent some time at least thinking about how he would do that, or they would do it as a family, they were able to depopulate a broiler house, still got the milk sold in a safe manner without contaminating other farms around that. So a little proactive planning really helps. Right now we have fairly aggressive programs within the poultry industry, the National Pork and the National Poultry Improvement Plans. So those programs are evolving. We have a secure milk program, which I believe, again, if you would adopt or at least consider it on your farm, you'd be able to come up with some biosecurity strategies. Again, the idea is to think proactively about biosecurity. Think about what that might mean with your partners. There's a regulatory component, PDA, USDA. There's an industry component about how we move products from place to place safely, maintain markets. Again, we had a good lesson today to think about what's the next succession. I mean, could your farm survive a depopulation? Suppose they said all your cows are going to be depopulated. How do you survive it? You'll get a little bit of indemnity money. How do you clean up? How do you restart? Think how many, I mean, we're talking years, maybe generations of genetics that may be wiped out. Think what would be the challenge that your family would face if that was it. Unfortunately, there's some serious psychological stress associated with farm families when their farm is, quote, quote, contaminated and they have to depopulate. Their livelihoods change, their futures change. It's hard. So think about that a little bit. Think about that, what happened for your workforce. Some of the people that you've hired, maybe worked with for years, no cows on your farm. What are they doing for a living? Suddenly they're out of work, at least until you repopulate the farm. And think about that, about the market access. How many people want to buy milk from, quote, quote, sick or infected cattle? It might be perfectly safe. How many people would want to buy milk like that? How many people want to buy eggs, quote, quote, when all the birds have flu in central Pennsylvania? It has an impact on the market. So finally, I want to think about how that all comes together. We'll be glad to answer some of your questions afterwards, but certainly appreciate this opportunity to speak to you a little bit from the PDA's perspective about high path AI, a little bit about the value of biosecurity for you as a dairy producer. Thank you.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. Let me advance my slide here. Okay, how many of you are in sales? Okay, well, a long time ago, White Oak Mills taught me the lesson, proper prior planning prevents pitifully poor performance. I'm sure others of you have heard that from other sales team meetings or whatnot, but I actually have that on my desk. I look at it every single day, proper prior planning. Say it really fast. It's like a tongue twister, everybody. But I want to talk about that today, proper prior planning in your bottom line, your ROI. And as I talk today, every time that I talk about like what we did at PennAg, I want you to replace that in your mind with the team at CDE and PM, Pennsylvania Professional Dairy Managers. PM, it's a lot of acronyms. Because really, so, you know, Jane asked us to come today to talk kind of in three series. So I have Dr. Wolfgang, who's kind of our regulator. Okay, he's keeping the shop running. He's telling us what's going on. PennAg kind of was a liaison, which is the same role these two groups, your two groups would do if or when something hits. And then we have Byron to represent a farm that got hit. So kind of think about what I talk about. You all are the Byrons up here. Dr. Wolfgang's still going to be Dr. Wolfgang in your scenario, okay? But it's Caroline, it's Jane that are going to be the me in your situation. So as we talk about that, think about that. Okay. So PennAg, we're an ag business trade association, but kind of our niche of why we got involved with all this is we have a poultry council, and we represent pretty much, our members represent pretty much all the birds in Pennsylvania. So, you know, the broilers, the layers, the live bird market, the vaccines, everything is kind of in our wheelhouse. So we know a lot about poultry at PennAg. So in our world of poultry, biosecurity is just an everyday fact. It is just like putting on your boots and your coveralls. Biosecurity is just what you do day in and day out. And honestly, if I was here 1 year ago and y'all would have said, hey, Jen, what if a disease hits the poultry industry in Pennsylvania? I'm like, we're good. Our guys are good. We have a network of how to reach each other. These guys have biosecurity plans. They have visitor logs on their farms. We're going to be okay. Yeah, well, my world got turned upside down at 6 a.m. on April 14th or before. So let me ask y'all this, because y'all have milk truck drivers coming to your farms, y'all have feed truck drivers coming to your farms, y'all have salesmen. How do you learn everything that's going on in the whole world in Pennsylvania? From those three groups of people that are coming onto your farm, okay? If you ever want to, I mean, the live haul drivers, I mean, I knew everything was going on at every pig farm by the live haul drivers. Well, you all have that network. We have that same network in the poultry industry, and it was the Penn Ag Banquet, and we had Amber Lee Snyder talking there, and I started seeing people leaving, and I knew what they represented, and I'm like, there's something fishy going on. Because we've had high path AI in all of our surrounding areas. So we're starting to hear rumors that night of there might be something. But it was all that whisper down the lane. Well, that next morning, 6 a.m., it busted ugly real quick. And by busting ugly, it really busted ugly. So I have 15 minutes to talk to y'all, and Byron and Dr. Wolfgang could talk to you for 10 hours on this. But the next slides that I'm going to go through, so my 15 minutes, my 8 slides, this is everything that went through my head and our actions at Penn Ag in the 2 minutes after we were told we have a high path positive in Pennsylvania. So what I'm going to talk about to you is what happened in the next 2 minutes in our head. So when you said I'm a busy lady, yeah, we were real busy in those 2 minutes. So let's talk about some of these. And again, this is really just to be honest with y'all of some things we had in place, some things that I wish we would have done better, some things we're still working on today that we need to improve. And I'm telling you all of this so that you can give the support to Caroline and Jean and all those others so that you all can get ready, because I hope y'all never have to use this, but you might, and you're going to want to be ready. So let's talk about this. So we get a phone call. We get confirmed from the National Vet Lab out in Iowa, yep, it's high path AI. So at that point in time, we're like, it's on. It's go time. So right away, we start thinking about how do you humanely put down birds? And let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, we're all in animals here, so we're going to use the real words. We have birds in a house. We put them down using foam. So if this is the floor of my house, and let's say my bird's this tall, I'm going to put foam in up over here, and they're going to suffocate, and that's a humane, that's the best way to put them down. Okay, so I can put down all these birds kind of where they're living right now. All right, how am I going to put down a 5,000 head hog barn with pigs that are in crates? How are you going to put down cows? I'm going to need them to be able to, in a sense, maybe walk out of the barn. How am I going to get them out? So we're starting to think about how we're putting them down. And you have to, don't ever forget the optics of this. Because I'm telling you what, as soon as you start pulling up in these Tyvek suits, and I'm not going to pick on my friends Phil and Chris up front here, but I've got reporters that are going to be right there with cameras. What are you doing? Now, these are friendly ag reporters. You know, what I don't want is the non-friendly one coming. What are you doing? How are you doing that? So you got to think about the optics of what you're doing. So we think about how we're going to put them down humanely, how we're going to dispose of them, how we're going to inform everybody. So, as I said, a year ago, I'd have told you we're good. Because I had a database of 300 emails. I was pretty proud of myself. 300 emails of people, all poultry players. I'm like, I can get the word out real fast. Yeah, well, that very quickly grew to over 750 people are on our list right now. And we'll talk about that. Who are the players? Who are the players at the state level? Who are the federal players? Who do you need to reach out to? Who do you need to have relationships with? Who's in charge? So who's in charge when there's a disease? Who do you take your instructions from? Because you're going to need to follow the rules, because Dr. Wolfgang mentioned a word called indemnity. Now, granted, you're not going to get rich off of that. But you also don't want to do anything that's going to violate getting that, because you're not going to get the money. So you got to think about that. I've got eggs I got to move to market. How do I do that? Who's in lead? Who's the top dog that tells me, yeah, you can move stuff? I need feed. When this broke in April, it was manure hauling time. Can I haul manure? Who's going to haul it? The FedEx drivers, all of those types of things. You've got other species on your farms. How do I move those? Can I move them? When can I move them? What approvals do I need? And my favorite is we all had to buy security plans that I told you the poultry industry is stellar at. And they are stellar at it. But they maybe hadn't looked at it in a couple years. So their call list, yeah, those people aren't there anymore. They don't know how to reach different people. So our biosecurity plans maybe weren't all current. That causes us problems. And again, from day one, you got to think about the indemnity, because you want to be able to replenish some dollars if possible. And again, we had to make sure it first was officially high-path AI, and we needed that from the National Vet Lab. Because HPAI means something different than AI in the world of trade. So the number one thing is, folks in other countries, and Dr. Wolfgang helped me, the China, whatnot, other countries get very concerned when you hear high-path AI, and that impacts trade. So you have to be very careful of the words you use as well, because there are global implications. Again, remember guys, this is all going through my head in the first 2 minutes of we're hot. We have a confirmed site. So remember how I told you we had 300 people? So we're like, okay, so this broke, and mind you, this broke like on Good Friday, okay? So we have Easter on Sunday. So that Saturday morning, we're all in the office and we're pulling together a Zoom call. We got the state vet, we got everybody on, we're good. Yeah, well, Caroline and Jean, make sure you have a Zoom account that allows more than 300 people. Because we had 400 people trying to get on the call. So as we're trying to do this call, people are texting, I can't get in, I can't get in, I can't get in. So then we're running out like, oh crap, our Zoom account only allows for 300 people. So update your Zoom accounts or your Teams accounts to 1,000 or unlimited number of people, because you will have everybody and their brother jumping on. Again, 750 people on a database, that's really cool. I don't know their cell numbers at all. So how many of you are walking around constantly looking at your email? You're not. You're out working. However, y'all probably carry a cell phone in your pocket. And if you got a little alert that said, 9 o'clock today, foot and mouth disease broke in Berks County, you're going to be like, oh crap. Go to your email for all the details. You would do that. You would do that. So we quickly realized we need cell phones so we can do that type of alert. Now, in our emails we send out, they're awesome. We send out, here's what's going on, here's a map, here's where the farms are, all the details you could ever want. But y'all are out working. You don't have time to look at that email. So we're working on that right now, getting everyone's cell phone numbers so we can just do a text of what's going on. We've got wonderful maps, the Paddles Lab system, and on the PDA website, the Paddles system, it has the zones. It has like the hotspot in the center and then the different zones that are out. So you can kind of see, do you fall within that zone? Because then that requires different testing you have to do. And then probably one of the big ones is, who else can play a role in all of this? You got to talk about the service providers, the extension, DEP. As soon as HPAI hit, we were on the phone with DEP and EPA saying, here's what's going on. Stop all inspections. And they did, instantly. And at the same time, PEMA, Pennsylvania Emergency Management, reached out to us and said, what can we do to help you? Hey, we have access to getting all the FedEx drivers to know not to come out to these farms. We have different tools. So it's pull all of these people. The Pennsylvania Motor Truckers Association blasted out everything to all of their drivers, that if you're going anywhere near these zones, please know. Biosecurity, there's a potential. So again, networks of people to start to create now. So my question to you all is, what's your first move if you get foot and mouth, anything that could be harmful? Do you feel like you're ready? Think about that. On your drive home tonight, think about, what if I have that phone call? Are we ready? What would we do? So the one thing, so as we're in the midst of all of this, again, I really thought our poultry people, and they are great, I thought they were all gangbusters ready to go. But I started to get phone calls of, hey Jen, where do I get a biosecurity sign to put up? And I'm like, how do you not have one of these already? So, simple things, biosecurity signs. Hey Jen, we need to rope off our driveway with cones. Where can I get a bunch of orange cones? I'm like, okay, again, things you all should know about already. Because if you get a disease, you're going to need these things. So, biosecurity signs, everybody. And I think Jean and I are working on a deal to get these for Ag Progress Days as well. So make sure you come and see us at Ag Progress Days when we do another talk. We're going to have biosecurity signs for y'all. But think about this. Think about your lines of separation on your farm. And Dr. Wolfgang talked about, Byron's going to talk about it, but okay. Do you share a driveway with somebody? Okay. Is there a one-way in for trucks and another way out for trucks? Okay. Have you ever walked around and just find somebody walking around your farm? You know, what are you going to do to make sure people aren't compromising your biosecurity and they could bring something with them? Think about the disposal. Okay, you got to render them. Yeah, good luck with that. We find that in high-path AI. Are you going to bury them? Are you going to compost them? All right, again, let's just say I got a 6-pound bird, and you all have a 2,000-pound cow. So let's think about that. So I can tell you, and Dr. Wolfgang can speak to this as well, we had one compost windrow that was over a mile long. That was over 55 tractor trailers of sawdust. Where are y'all going to get your sawdust? Because let me tell you, we've called everybody, and we have a list in Pennsylvania, but we were scrambling because if one farm needs that much sawdust, there's going to be another one that needs that another one. So think about that. Know who to call at PDA, USDA. Talk to your banker now about this stuff. Let them know what would be your plan. And one of the big things is we talk to legislators. Hey, this is going on. This is going to impact your constituents. Hey, we might need some leniency with permitting, or we might need some funding opportunities. Think about these things. Do you all have a phone call list? Do you have these systems in place of who to call, how to reach all the dairy farmers? Because there's no database at the state level that tells you every farmer in Pennsylvania how to reach them. So it's all industry specifics. Think about that. The biosecurity science, the PPE, have a network to call for equipment. Because if you need a backhoe or a dump truck, and your neighbor also has a disease, I can't compromise that equipment because it's dirty. So I'm going to need to clean it, disinfect it. You need to have multiple backup plans. You need to have a plan A, B, and C. What do the suppliers have on hand? And what is the lag time in getting it? So we got foam to put down these birds, from Michigan and Wisconsin, tractor trailing that in. So think about, is there a lag time for this stuff? Talk to the drivers. Okay, you guys, your milk truck drivers, do they have a tire wash on their truck? Have you talked to them about that? Have you talked to them about wearing booties? And Dr. Wolfgang can talk to you greatly about no-slip little booties to put on, because he has a line on no-slip little booties. Think about all of these things, and probably the last point here is the biggest one. You are going to be stressed beyond anything you've ever done in your life. This is very stressful, it's very emotional. We are all raised animals. We know animals die. We know we put animals down. We don't get joy out of that. And having to put down a barn, no matter what it is, of animals is very hard, let alone all of the stress of income, paying bills, and whatnot. So this is going to be one of the most stressful things you will ever go through. And everyone you're involved with is very stressed. And you are working 24/7 on it. And we've been working 24/7 on this since April, basically. So again, proper prior planning prevents pitifully poor performance. Protect your ROI. And honestly, have those hard conversations now, because when it hits, you don't have time to think about any of this. You really don't, because you are in just response mode and we got to make stuff happen. So think about these things now. And I will now turn it over to Byron.
So I don't recall ever speaking in front of a group where I had an introduction before. And one piece was missing from that introduction. I happen to be the father of 4 grown children, and I have 11 grandchildren ranging from age to 5 to 15. So my first question to you is, why do grandparents and grandchildren get along so well? I'll help you with that. It's because they have a common enemy. And so we have a common enemy, and I would do you a disservice if I didn't come here and treat you as my friends, knowing that there may be 1 or 2 in the room who see the world differently than I do and differently than the agricultural, but I'll take that chance with the idea that we have a common interest and a common enemy and a common cause. I will tell you, in my role with Kreider Farms, which it has been my honor to be with for 22 years, I never compete with any of our competition, whether it be in the egg industry, the dairy industry, whatever. I never compete when it comes to biosecurity. If my competition needs something, or if I have a piece of information that's going to help them, I share. When it comes to food safety, I share. And I believe that's a reciprocal agreement. I know in the poultry industry, we are fierce rivals. I mean, for a tenth of a cent on a carton of eggs, you'll take your neighbor's account, and then you'll ask him to co-pack with you. So it's an interesting dynamic. So Kreider Farms has been doing this for a very long time. Christian Hershey immigrated to this country in 1717, and the first homestead was built in 1736 in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and the family has been there ever since. In 1935, Mr. Noah Kreider Sr. courted and married a woman by the name of Mary Hershey, a descendant of Christian Hershey, and they bought the farm at auction during the Great Depression, and it consisted of about 135 acres, about 100 chickens, and maybe 10 cows. We're in the third generation of the Kreider family. Ron Kreider is the president of Kreider Farms. We have about 3,000 acres. We have 6 farms, including one of them that is combined species, where we have both dairy and poultry. The other 5 are located throughout Lancaster, Lebanon, and Dauphin counties. We admit to having 6 million hens. We might have a few more. That's across 37 flocks at 5 different locations. Plus, in addition, we have 8 to 10 at any given time contract pullet growers. So we're managing about 45 flocks. We have a dairy herd. We are one of the remaining producer processors. It's a closed herd, and that milk goes to our farm. We sell a little bit of it off to our friends at Land O'Lakes, but most of that milk is processed on our farm, and we don't bring milk currently from other farms. And we have a small dairy milk plant, ice cream plant. We do some juices and drinks. We're not as big as some, we're not as small as some, and it's part of our legacy. So the risk in being up here today is that you'll see me as an expert who solved this problem. I'm living this problem. This has gone on for us since 2015, when it became very obvious, based upon the huge outbreak in the Midwest, that we better have a biosecurity plan and we better have it quick. Dr. Wolfgang was leading the charge back then, and I am eternally grateful for the work that he did in pulling an industry together. But we've had this plan for our farm since 2015. And it has had probably 3 or 4 different incantations and developments, and it's been audited 4 or 5 times to make sure we're compliant. Why? Because if we didn't have a biosecurity plan, if it eventually hit our farm, or when it eventually hit our farm, we weren't going to get indemnity. We were part of the group in 1983 in Lancaster County where high-path avian influenza basically came through the county, and the public probably didn't know much about it. But it devastated the poultry industry in Lancaster County. So what you see in front of you right now is a picture of Lancaster 1. Now, Dr. Wolfgang alluded to the fact that there's probably close to 45 of these now that have hit since April 14th. We were, in the United States, as of this morning, there were about 316 commercial premises that have been infected by high-path avian influenza, with an additional 450 or 500 diagnosed backyard flocks. We're close to almost 60 million birds that have been put down. To give you some perspective, 2015-16 it was about 46 million birds. So we've already surpassed that, and the spring doesn't look very good. So this Donegal farm, you see the overhead view and you see the beautiful front view. This farm has been in the family since the early 70s. It's a beautiful farm. In fact, at the bottom picture you can see the processing plant to the right toward the middle there. It was about 4 years ago that we actually built that building over top of the old processing plant and tore down the building from inside so that we could continue to process eggs the whole way. This farm has 5 layer houses, and at capacity, it's about 1.4 million birds. The top picture, you can see an overhead aerial view with at the bottom is the processing plant and then the series of layer houses. They're all conventional style layer houses, cage layer houses if you will, with manure belt style removal. So the back half of those barns is actually manure shed, enclosed on 3 sides. We run all the manure out. Because of that system, we virtually eliminated rodents and flies on the farm. In fact, it's been over a year since we've actually found a mouse in the layer house, and that's an important part of our biosecurity and our food safety program. To the very back of those barns, you see some windrows. That's about 15 acres. Those are the windrows from 1.4 million birds that we took down after our April 14th break. The compost rows, most of them are still there. That's about 15 acres. It's close to 1.3 million birds, and it's 276 trailer loads of mulch. We couldn't compost it on our own. We work with USDA and a gentleman by the name of Hubble French out of Tennessee, who was traveling the country composting HPAI cases. He's made a nice little business for himself. He was great, and he helped us get it done. Our plan originally called for burial. Chris Sigmund from Team Ag was there, and he helped us write a plan to burial, and when we took it in front of DEP, they weren't ready to approve that, so we ended up having to compost on top. One of my plans early on was to take them to the landfill. I started in 2016 to get permission to take them to the landfill. I was still working on it a year after, almost a year after we broke. We got some things to the landfill, but we didn't take any mortality. It was all composted on farm, which speaks to the reason why you need to have a evolutionary plan, one that's live and living, because you may write the plan, but if you don't get some people involved up front to help you develop that plan and approve it, your plan is for naught. Day 1, Donegal. We had seen an uptick in mortality. It was an unusual spring last year, as this spring is already unusual. We don't see the snow, we don't see the cold. We have a cold snap, and then we have a really warm snap. That's what was happening last year. We had some incredibly warm days, 60-degree days, and then we got northeast rainstorms, and the wind was blowing from the northeast. And we saw a slight uptick in mortality in a 420,000 bird. Now, it's the middle house at Donegal, 420,000 birds in there, 64 weeks old. And we had a mortality on April 11th of 178. At that age, you're concerned about that type of mortality, but you're not thinking high-path avian influenza. The other thing, it was in the middle of the house. It wasn't at one end or the other, and it wasn't necessarily near the ventilation. April 12th, 329. We had our own flock services team and a team of veterinarians working with us to diagnose what may have gone wrong. We found an inlet that was stuck closed in and around that area, and we said, okay, that's our culprit. A stuck inlet would definitely lead to some mortality, hot birds, cold birds, seasonal changes. April 13th, that jumped to 603. We had an idea something was going wrong. We started to see multiple birds in cages or colonies rather than just one here and one there. We determined that we were going to be in that building, a team was going to be in that building on the morning of April 14th, and then if that was any higher, we were going to get samples to the lab. I called Dr. Brightbill at 6:30 a.m. when we went into that house and saw close to 1,000 dead. By 1 p.m. that day, we had 6,270 dead birds. We took the samples to the lab up in Harrisburg. They sent some off to NVSL, and we began our preparations because I think all of us knew what was about to happen. There was some optimism that that was something else. There were certainly other diseases, coryza, other diseases that could have resulted in that type of impact. And plus, we were Crater Farms. We were the first. We had a biosecurity plan. It couldn't happen to us. By 6 o'clock that afternoon, we knew it was. By 9 o'clock that night, we had all the approvals that we needed from USDA, and we began the process of bringing down those birds. We shut the ventilation down. Time was not our friend. If we were going to protect our neighbors, if we were going to protect other flocks, we had to depopulate those birds. We knew, based upon what we were seeing with the trends, that this was going to get very ugly and the birds were going to suffer, and the humane thing to do was to bring them down. We shut down the ventilation. We had a USDA veterinarian on site. And by about 11:30 that night, every bird in that house was dead. Now, you're not a human. If that doesn't hit a heart, it hits me today. If that doesn't hit your heartstring a little bit, that 400,000 lives are taken. Within 3 days, we finished that depopulation, and Easter morning, we took down the last flock. That was the right thing to do. It protected our neighbors, it protected an industry, it protected our farms, and it was the plan that we had all along. I can get into a lot of details here with you. I won't, because I want you to have time to answer ask some questions. But some of the complications in this matter is, once you've depopulated, then what? What do you do with those birds? Well, the first thing we do is we began the process of removing them from the layer houses and putting them in the sheds, in the manure sheds. And that was right behind. So we could keep that area biosecure, and then we did a mix of the manure that was in the sheds already and some organic matter, and then we could keep the leachate from the decomposing birds from seeping out. But we were going to hold those birds under some sort of a building for about 3 days, because at that point the virus load was going to drop significantly enough that we could begin the composting process. We were able then to, after 3 days, starting with the first house we depopulated, we began the composting process out on the fields, bringing in those 276 loads of mulch. But we had 25 trailer loads of eggs on that farm. In fact, Kreider Farms on any given day produces about 26 trailer loads of eggs across all of our facilities, and those eggs nothing could be done with them at that moment other than dispose of them. Is Mr. Rainford in the audience today? Brett Rainford, or someone from Rainford Farms? God bless him. They took 25 trailer loads of eggs on or before May 14th to his methane digester, and that's how we got them disposed of. Some other farms since then were able to take them to public landfills. There was no real risk to the public, maybe a slight risk if you didn't properly move the eggs off the farm, that you would risk some contamination from some other farms. But when the USDA did the EpiLinks later on, what they determined was virtually almost in every situation, this virus didn't move farm to farm. It was introduced through wild birds. There were some exceptions in Lancaster and Berks counties where farms were very close together. But maybe one of the things that I'm most proud of during this process is that we didn't contaminate our other farms. So if you think you have to write a biosecurity plan and be able to do everything, think again. Do what you can until you can do everything you want. So the biosecurity plan, there are templates out there for both the secure egg supply and the secure milk supply, secure swine. There are templates that allow you, and there are 14 points that basically most of us focus on to prevent the disease from coming on our farm. And then there's the whole 3D plans, which involves depopulation, disposal, and disinfection. Make sure that you're writing a plan where you cover each of those points, and if you can't be perfect, do what you can. We've invested a lot. Kreider Farms has the advantage of being big. We have a lot of resources. We can apply those resources. We can dedicate equipment to a single farm, and we do, but we didn't always do it that way. We didn't always make sure that every employee had a clean uniform every day and that we had shower facilities. That's come over time. So start and build from there. Maybe I'll leave you with just a couple other things before I turn it over to some questions. One of the things that you'll do in your plans is you'll develop zones and travel paths. You'll have perimeter buffer areas. You'll have lines of separation, lines that you do not cross. If there's one thing I could correct in Andy's presentation, it would be, don't let that young man go to school wearing the same boots that he wears on the farm. What's wrong with that story? He may be proud of it, but that's as bad as it gets. Have a 3D plan. If you think you have a depopulation plan, have another one, because it may not get approved. I will tell you that the PDA and the USDA were my friends during this process. I repeated the same story sometimes 50 times to 50 different people, but they were helpful. And one of the reasons they were really helpful to me is because Dr. Wolfgang has been on my farm when he was the acting state veterinarian, and he helped us develop a plan. He also helped us with the infancy of our milk plan. And Dr. Brightbill was on my farm 2 weeks before. So we use those resources, and it's different when you look someone in the eye who's been on your farm, who gets it, and then you're working through your plan with them and executing it. So have a depopulation plan, have a disposal plan, have a disinfection plan, and then have a backup. Communicate, communicate, communicate. This is the Mannheim farm. This is the one that wasn't infected. In fact, we kept it clean. But today it's only 6 miles away from the duck flock and 2 more flocks that are being depopulated as we speak. To the right of the orange line, you see the layer farms, 2 processing plants, 17 flocks. To the left, you see the dairy farm. You see the Susquehannock grave site where the last 2 Susquehannock Native Americans were buried back in 1770 that the Kreider, or the Hershey family took care of. And then at the very upper left-hand corner, you see the milk processing plant. We can get our milk from the dairy to the milk plant. But you need to have a way that you can protect both farms in this situation. If I would tell you anything, it's guard the doors, because this is a hands and feet. Foreign animal diseases are hands and feet. That's your first line of protection. In the case of poultry, you better guard the skies. There are things that you can do. The most important thing I can leave you with today is do something, even if you can't do everything. Thank you.
So thank you so much for our 3 presenters. Whew, that's a lot of information to take in, but that's what it's here, the education, the tools, and taking that first step. So now we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So we've got folks with microphones out there. Okay. So do we have a first question from the floor? You can also, if you can raise your hand and get the microphone person to you. I have a few up here that I can get started with while we're waiting on. So if you're thinking or writing that down. We're going to start with the first question. This will be for Jennifer. How important do you think the connection role you played between the regulatory side and the farmer side was to the process of what happened with the communication flow? And why was that so important?
So, and I think that's from the Penang standpoint, but also from professional dairy managers and Center for Dairy Excellence. Every day we are in these meetings and having these connections. So when it was go time, we knew who to call, we knew who the players were, but more importantly, the players knew us. And again, that comes from just building relationships, and again, it goes back to having cell phones and their cell numbers to be able to call them, because they're not checking emails either. So it's important that you work with your groups. They're on the farms, they know what's going on. They, Jean, Caroline, me, we're your advocates in Harrisburg, so we're helping to draw these connections so that we can get Byron connected to whom he might need or whatnot. So it's very important, but I think you guys are very, very lucky with the groups that you have as well.
Any more questions from the... Go ahead.
Jen, I have one. Is there protection in it? Having a plan not only prepares your operation, but was there something that triggered a lot of plans being suddenly written during the break to cover, like if you had a plan, does that give you some kind of protection, Dr. Wolfgang, or anybody? Is that like from depopulation, or what happens if you, is there any other protection other than you are ready?
So there's probably 2 big parts to that question. First is you usually have to have a biosecurity plan that's approved to get indemnity. So there's a bunch of steps that you have to go through. Byron alluded to this as well as Jennifer. There's certain criteria that you have to meet to be qualified for indemnity. Most of that is that you've been doing your best to follow the rules ahead of time, and so sometimes having that biosecurity plan approved ahead of time is important. This is especially important in poultry, where they have the National Poultry Improvement Plan, and so birds that are in those plans already, if those plans have been approved, that gives you a leg up in the indemnity sort of chain. The other part of that is to move any products off your farm in that control zone area, the affected control zone, that's the important part. You have to have a permit. And so theoretically, a milk truck will have to, if you're in, there's a poultry outbreak, and you have to drive into that control zone. You have to have a permit to drive that milk truck in there to pick up milk. You're not even touching poultry products. So that poultry control zone dictates permits for all other sort of ag commodities in and around that farm. And so feed mills, to go into that control zone, have to have a permit to bring feed in to your facility. And so all those permits are dictated by a biosecurity plan. You don't get to move your product without a biosecurity plan ahead of time. So that's the two big ones.
I mean, currently today at the Mannheim farm, we happen to be in a control zone because of the recent outbreak. We started last Tuesday. We have been swabbing the house and mortality. It's a mortality swab every single day. And in that particular farm, it's about 18 swabs a day times 11 birds per swab. So we know that those eggs that are going to move off that farm are done so by permit after we receive the test back. And fortunately, we have 3 fantastic labs, Harrisburg, Penn State, and then New Bolton Center down University of Pennsylvania, that has technicians on site that are testing that every day so that we can reassure the consumers and the public that our eggs are safe.
Okay. What do you see as dairy's biggest, or the weakest areas in dairy, and what recommendations do you have for the industry to change?
Well, I think complacency is the biggest weakness that you have. We haven't had a major outbreak in the dairy industry since 1909, and so people sometimes think that because of that, we're doing a really good job. And I think we've been lucky, and maybe a lot of prayer helped that. But one of the challenges, and you'll see this with commodities all over the world, products people move across the globe very quickly now. I read reports every day. Foot and mouth disease in Jordan, foot and mouth disease in Israel, foot and mouth disease in other parts of the world. How easy would it be to bring some small product in, get into a dairy farm? Again, folks, maybe $50 billion would be the cost to the United States for a dairy outbreak, because cows move, and they're big, and we move them in auctions, we move them in sale barns, we move them in different production groups on our farms. It would probably move across, unfortunately, the United States faster than we could get our arms around it. In Pennsylvania, because we have the largest processing plant for cull dairy cattle in, east of the Mississippi. We have the largest multi-species auction east of the Mississippi, in the center of our most concentrated ag area. Because we've been fortunate and people have done a good job, we haven't had a crisis. But as Byron alluded to, biosecurity plans developed now, modified, watched. Again, if I could, one more point, that would protect you from other respiratory diseases. It would protect you against other fecal oral diseases. It would protect you against other bloodborne diseases. So a good biosecurity plan is extremely important for domestic diseases, as well as the more critical, maybe more scary foreign animal diseases. So I think, again, a good biosecurity plan would make your calves healthier, make your young heifers healthier, make your lactating animals healthier. A good biosecurity plan would be really money in the bank. And I think because as production has gotten better in the United States and dairy industry, most people have a pretty good biosecurity plan to prevent diseases spreading on their farm. The probably weakness part is they don't think about what would happen if one of these really bad diseases snuck in. As Byron said, they had a beautiful farm and a good plan. There was sort of a chink in the armor about exposure from probably wild birds and probably wild waterfowl. And that chink in the armor allowed their house to go down. And that same chink in the armor has probably allowed the virus to be carried up and down the East Coast in the United States. And so if you think about it, that allowance of foreign animal diseases to come into this country and to get into our herds and flocks because it's unusual would probably be our biggest area. And so we just have to think about how diseases transfer in the system's thought and not be complacent just because we've been good for the last 100+ years that we might not have a problem in the future.
If I could just add one thing, I would say that one of the big challenges right now would be communication, and I'll start at the end and go back, and that would be outreach to the Amish and the Plains Tech farming community. And I say that because when High Path hit, we started to run ads in the Lancaster farming, like every Saturday, every other Saturday, about here's where it's at, here's the drop-off sites, here's what to do. Because everybody reads Lancaster farming, and we thought we were doing, good with that. But what we found out is there's, in, some, particularly was the Amish community, if their birds were sick, they didn't really want to talk about that because they knew that they might have to depop and their neighbor might get it, and that would cause an economic hardship to their community. So that's one of the things that with this, what's going on right now, this outbreak, we're really focusing on the Plain Sec and the Amish community and how to get that message out to them through their communication lines. So that would be something that's an ongoing challenge for us right now that we're working on.
Go ahead.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I'm realizing how ignorant I have been in this. Could you say a little bit more about how, being in a HPAI zone would affect the ability to move feed and milk out of our dairies, and what we should be doing, maybe ASAP, to resolve that?
So he's alluding to. So the question was really alluding to the issue of permitting of products. And so without the plan ahead of time, you run into this issue of how do you move, and Byron mentioned this, how do you move product from the quote dirty side to the clean side, or clean side to the dirty side? And so right now, this permitting process requires that you contact either USDA or PDA officials, and they issue a permit. Permit is really permission to do something, and there's usually a time constraints to that. Right now, the permits for feed mill is 30 days, and so what we do is say if you're operating within this, there's an affected zone, sort of a control zone, and then a buffer zone, surveillance zone. So tight in against the infected flock, really, really restricted what we can do. Control zone is limited, and then the buffer zone is more like a surveillance. And so we want to find the disease. As Byron mentioned, all these flocks now that are close by have to do swabs to prove that the products are clean, and then once they're clean in this area, then they have permission to move out of this quote, as a clean product into commerce. So bringing stuff in is not really the problem. If you have clean stuff out here, it's pretty easy to bring stuff in. The real challenge is once you're in this control zone, how do you prove that you can take things out? So right now, for things that are not related to poultry directly, again, it's pretty simple. For the feed companies, again, if they're servicing in that area, they have to have a biosecurity plan, which we usually approve for 30 days. And so that company gets this permission for 30 days, following this biosecurity plan, to drive feed into that control zone. Okay? And so the idea is being careful to use entire washers, something like that, to make sure that you're not bringing the virus back out. It's a little more complicated if you work in the zone, but again, it's a permission process. And when you're wrapped up, the dairy farm that was wrapped up last year, I mean, they're literally right beside an infected flock. And so they had to have permission, quote, quote, again, to cleanly bring that dairy truck in to pick up milk, and then to cleanly take that dairy product out. And so it's a permission process. It's fairly simple once you're into it. You're assigned a number, and then you're given the permit, and it's usually for a limited amount of time. If you follow the biosecurity plan, then you can operate.
All right. We're going to wrap up here, I think, with a question for Byron. Along with the financial toll that the epidemic took on your farm, talk a little bit about the emotional toll for your employees. How do you explain, how do they understand, how do they know what they're being a part of?
So the Donegal farm, it's over in Mountjoy, eastern Lancaster County. We had about 75 employees on that farm. Some worked just in processing, and then probably about half of them worked in the caretakers area. So most of our employees are long-term employees, and they take ownership in their barns or in their flocks. In fact, the birds recognize them in the barns. You know that you see it. And so as much as it hits some of the leadership, imagine working aside of a flock of birds every day that you've done everything you can to take care of, and now that barn has to be depopulated. Perfectly healthy birds prior to that. We didn't furlough a single employee. We are fortunate in that the process of cleaning the farm was extensive, from the depopulation to the disposal. And then what I didn't mention is the disinfection process. We heated the barns to 107 degrees after they were, or 100 degrees after they were heated for 7 days, to make sure that they were disinfected. So all that takes time and resources. Every employee got paid. When it was done, the initial 3D process, obviously it takes time then to get approval to repopulate. So we depopulated starting April 14th. We were done April 17th. We put the first flock back in, which I believe was in a record time, on July 29th. In fact, we had a pullet farm about 200 yards away from our Donegal farm that was raising birds that was scheduled to go in one of those houses. That farm never broke. In fact, we were able to populate the farm with that pullet house, so it can be done. But we moved those employees to other farms, and we didn't necessarily need them at other farms. In some cases, we transported them, but everybody got paid. Not every farm's in that situation, so that you would obviously have to take advantage of the programs that are available to you, but we kept every employee. From an emotional standpoint, you feel it. I mean, these birds are part of your family, despite what some in the world would have you believe, that, you know, we care a lot, because birds don't lay eggs if they're not well taken care of. And we invest a lot of time, money, effort, and blood, sweat, and tears. So the caretakers, they're their family. And so you can imagine what it's like. And yeah, there were some times where, you know, we had to sit down and talk and help people kind of work through the emotion of it all. It's a challenge. You know, Ron Kreider, we have a love-hate relationship. He's the owner of the company. Most of the meetings I attend, about halfway through, he walks out because he says, "You're too depressing. I don't like what you have to say." But that night, on April 14th, he's, as I'm calling him saying, "This has got to happen and I need your signature," he said, "I'm glad you're there and I need you. Tonight I need you." Later on, he said he was drinking when he said that, but at that moment, you know, our team knew that we needed them, and we couldn't say thank you enough. And to this day, I mean, this is a shared experience, one that I don't want any of you to have to go through, but you better be ready just in case.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's say thank you to Jennifer, Byron, and Dr. Wolfgang. Thank you so much for all of your words of wisdom. We want to say a big thank you to the Pennsylvania Dairymen's Association. They